Michael Harris, a retired police officer bound to a wheelchair, wheeled himself quietly into the Riverstone Animal Shelter. He wasn't there for comfort. He was only hoping to find a dog that might ease the silence of his empty home. But when he reached the very last cage, his breath caught. Lying in the shadows was a German shepherd, scarred and silent, and with one tired lift of its head, Michael froze. It was Bruno, his loyal canine partner who had vanished 3 years ago in a mission gone wrong. How had Bruno survived all this time, and why had fate brought them back together here after years of unbearable loss? What happened next will make you cry and believe in miracles again. Before we start, tell me where you're watching from. Drop your country in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. The autumn sky over Riverstone, Oregon was a muted gray, the kind that pressed low over the roofs and carried the smell of damp leaves through the streets. A light drizzle had fallen earlier that morning, leaving the sidewalks glistening. The small town moved at its usual unhurried pace, but inside the heart of one man, time dragged like an endless wait. Michael Harris guided his wheelchair along the cracked pavement toward the squat brick building with the faded sign that read, Riverstone Animal Shelter. At 42, Michael looked older than his years. His hair, once thick and black, was now threaded with silver at the temples, his jaw lined with the shadows of exhaustion. His broad shoulders still spoke of the officer he once was, a man of discipline and strength, but the wheelchair beneath him told the rest of the story. 3 years ago, during a raid on a suspected drug warehouse, an explosion had torn through the building. Michael had survived, but his legs had not. The injury ended his career with the Riverstone Police Department and left him with the echo of nightmares that replayed the moment again and again. Worst of all, in that same fiery instant, he lost Bruno, his loyal German Shepherd canine partner, who disappeared in the chaos and was presumed dead. Michael had lived with silence ever since. His modest home on the edge of town felt more like a bunker than a sanctuary. Today, urged by his therapist, he had finally agreed to come here, not because he believed another dog could replace Bruno, but because he needed something, anything, to soften the loneliness. As Michael reached the door, it opened before he could lift a hand. Linda Martinez, the shelter's manager, greeted him warmly. She was a woman in her early 50s with kind hazel eyes framed by laugh lines and a halo of auburn hair streaked with gray, tied in a loose bun. Life had not been gentle with her. Widowed young, she had poured her energy into running the shelter for the past 2 decades. Her voice carried both steadiness and gentleness, the kind that made both animals and people feel at ease. "Officer Harris," she said, her tone respectful, though she knew he no longer wore the badge. "It's good to see you out today. We've got a few companions who might like to meet you." Michael gave a polite nod, keeping his hands on the wheels of his chair. "Just Michael now?" he murmured, his voice low and gravelly. Linda smiled. "Once an officer, always an officer. Come inside, I'll show you around." The shelter smelled faintly of bleach and wet fur, a mixture Michael had known all too well from his days working with the K9 unit. Narrow corridors lined with kennels stretched out, each one alive with movement and sound. Dogs of all shapes and sizes bounded forward, tails wagging, paws tapping against the bars. A golden retriever barked eagerly, a beagle howled with stubborn persistence, and a pair of mixed breeds leapt in playful competition for attention. Michael moved down the row, his expression unreadable. He kept his hands steady on the chair, though his knuckles whitened slightly. His eyes scanned the kennels without focus, as if he were drifting through a memory rather than standing among the living. "Take your time," Linda encouraged, walking beside him. "They're all waiting for someone." But as Michael neared the end of the corridor, his breath caught. In the farthest corner, away from the eager chaos, a large German shepherd lay curled in silence. His coat was rough and patchy, scars marking his flank and across one ear. His body looked older than it should have, weighed down by hardship. Unlike the others, he did not rush the gate, did not wag his tail. He merely lay there, still, as though he had long ago given up expecting anyone to come for him. Michael's heart pounded. His eyes locked onto the shepherd's face, and for a split second the world around him fell silent. Those eyes, deep, amber, weary but alert, were eyes he had seen before. "No," Michael whispered, almost to himself. His voice cracked as he leaned forward in the chair, gripping the wheels so tightly his knuckles turned pale. "It can't be." The shepherd stirred at the sound. Slowly, painfully, he lifted his head. For a heartbeat, the dog only stared, then gave a soft, low bark, quiet, almost a question. Michael's throat closed. He pressed a hand to his mouth, overwhelmed. "Bruno." The name slipped out like a prayer. Linda frowned, startled. "You know him?" Michael wheeled himself closer until he was eye level with the dog. His chest ached as memories flooded back. Nights patrolling dark streets, moments of wordless companionship, the sound of paws pounding beside him in pursuit. He reached a trembling hand through the bars. Bruno's ears twitched. At first, hesitation. Then, as though recognition had pierced the fog of years, the dog stood unsteady, scarred, but unmistakably alive. He pressed his muzzle against Michael's palm, letting out a sound that was half whimper, half relief. Linda's eyes widened. He never gets up when people pass. He's been like a ghost in that corner for months. We didn't think—" She broke off, watching as the bond between man and dog ignited like a flame long smothered but never extinguished. Michael felt tears burn his eyes, but he didn't look away. "I thought I lost you," he whispered, stroking the dog's fur. 3 years. Bruno, you survived?" Bruno pressed closer, his tail giving a slow, tentative wag, the first sign of hope in his weary body. For the first time in years, Michael's chest loosened. Something that had been locked away inside him cracked open. The shelter, the kennels, the noise of other dogs, all of it faded. There was only him and Bruno and the truth that they had both been broken but not beyond repair. Linda's voice was soft, reverent. "Michael, I think you found your companion." Michael shook his head slightly, never taking his eyes from Bruno. "No," he said, his voice steadier now. "I think I just got my partner back." Michael's hands trembled on the rims of his wheelchair as he leaned closer to the cage. The shepherd inside, scarred, thin, fur dulled by neglect shifted slightly. His hind leg bore an old injury, the muscle wasted, the movement stiff. But the eyes, those amber eyes, gleamed suddenly with a light that pierced through the haze of years. Bruno, though weathered, still carried the same fire that had once raced alongside him in the dead of night. The dog let out a low growl, not hostile but uncertain, like a soldier waking from a dream. Then came a single bark, sharp but not desperate. It was almost as though he was asking, "Is it really you?" Michael swallowed hard, his throat tight. He whispered the old service command, his voice faltering at first but then strengthening. "Sit." Bruno's body jerked with recognition. Slowly, almost painfully, he lowered his haunches to the concrete floor, just as he had done hundreds of times before. The sight broke something loose in Michael. He pressed a hand against the cold bars, his voice thick. "You remember." After all this time, Linda, standing slightly behind him, gasped. She stepped forward, her brows drawn together in wonder. "I don't believe it," she murmured. "That dog never responds to anyone. He barely eats when we feed him. I thought he'd forgotten how to trust." Michael turned his head toward her, his steel-gray eyes damp. "Where did you find him?" Linda shifted her weight and folded her arms across her chest as though steadying herself before telling a hard story. 3 months ago. A trucker called it in, said he saw a shepherd limping along the highway near Cedar Ridge just beyond town. Took us nearly an hour to coax him close enough to slip a lead on him. He fought like he thought we'd hurt him. Since then, he stayed in that corner, quiet. No one has shown interest, until now. Michael looked back at Bruno, still sitting obediently, his gaze locked on the man he once knew. His chest tightened as he thought of those 3 missing years. What had the dog endured? Cold nights, hunger, pain, and yet here he was, Olive still carrying the discipline of a K-9 officer deep in his bones. Another staff member passed by then, a young man named Kevin. He was tall and lanky, perhaps in his early 20s, with sandy blonde hair that perpetually fell into his eyes. He wore a faded green shelter t-shirt and jeans smudged with paw prints. Cheerful by nature, Kevin had been the one tasked with cleaning the kennels and walking the dogs that could be handled. But when he saw Michael crouched forward with Bruno responding, his grin faltered. "Holy smokes," Kevin said, adjusting his glasses. "That's the first time I've seen him move for anyone. Usually he just lies there like stone." He scratched the back of his neck nervously. "Guess he's been waiting." Michael ran a hand down his face, trying to compose himself. His voice was quiet but firm. "He's my partner. He went missing on duty. I thought he was gone forever." Kevin's eyes widened. Then he let out a low whistle. "Well, that explains it. Makes sense now why he looks so different around you. Dogs remember more than people give them credit for." Linda stepped closer to the cage, crouching beside Michael. Her hazel eyes softened as she studied the connection unfolding before her. "Michael," she said gently, "Bruno hasn't let anyone touch him since we brought him in. He snaps, growls, even at the vet. But look at him now. It's like he's come back to life." Michael reached a little farther, and Bruno pushed his nose against the gap between the bars, pressing warm breath onto Michael's trembling fingers. It wasn't the fierce push of a young, eager K9, but the quiet, deliberate touch of recognition. Michael closed his eyes, the memories flooding him, chasing suspects through alleys, the sharp bark that signaled danger, the solid comfort of Bruno's presence after a long shift. "I don't know how," Michael whispered, "but he survived. And somehow, he found his way back here, and to me the shelter corridor felt strangely quiet. Even the other dogs seemed subdued, as though they sensed something sacred happening." Linda placed a hand on Michael's shoulder. Maybe some bonds are stronger than loss. Maybe he wasn't ready to let go. Bruno gave another bark, softer this time, his tail swishing once against the concrete floor. Kevin cleared his throat, shifting awkwardly but smiling again. "Well, if this isn't fate, I don't know what is." Michael chuckled, though it came out rough and hoarse. He looked at Linda, determination steadying his voice. "I'm not leaving him here. Whatever paperwork, whatever it takes, I'm taking him home." Linda hesitated, her practical nature flickering through her kind eyes. "Michael, he's older now, 9, maybe 10. His injury still troubles him. He doesn't trust easily. He'll need patience, care, maybe more than most people could give." Michael looked down at his wheelchair, then back at Bruno, who still hadn't looked away. A weary smile tugged at his mouth. "We're both broken. But broken doesn't mean useless. If he remembers me, then I know we can heal together." Linda studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "All right. But you should know you'll need to visit with him a few more times before we finalize anything. We have policies, especially with dogs considered unadoptable. But I think you're the exception." Michael nodded, his chest swelling with something he hadn't felt in years. Hope. He reached through the bars again, and Bruno pressed closer, eyes shining with that same familiar loyalty. For the first time since the explosion, Michael felt whole. The paperwork was signed with Linda's steady hand guiding the process, her kind eyes glancing up every so often to check that Michael was certain. He never wavered. For the first time in years, he had felt something spark back to life, and he wasn't about to let go of it. Bruno was led from the kennel with a cautious gait, his paws clicking softly on the linoleum floor. His frame was leaner than it should have been, ribs faintly visible beneath the coarse fur, yet there was still a proud dignity in the way he carried himself. As they approached the exit, Bruno hesitated. The doors opened automatically with a soft whoosh, letting in a breath of cool autumn air. He paused, his ears twitching back, a shadow of doubt crossing his amber eyes. Michael understood. Bruno had been left, lost, hurt. Why would he trust the world outside another cage? Michael reached out, his fingers curling around the leash. He didn't tug. Instead, he spoke in that low voice Bruno had always known. "Let's go, partner." Bruno's ears flicked forward. His body tensed, then released. With a slow step, he walked forward and positioned himself naturally to the right side of Michael's wheelchair, his pace measured, matching the rhythm of the wheels as though no years had passed. The sight pulled a quiet breath of wonder from Linda. She folded her arms, shaking her head with a soft smile. "It's like he never left your side." The ride home was quiet. Michael's old pickup truck had been modified with a ramp to accommodate his wheelchair, and now Bruno lay in the passenger seat, curled against the worn fabric, his head resting on his paws. Every so often, he lifted his gaze to look at Michael, and each time their eyes met, Michael felt the weight of those missing years, but also the blessing of this reunion. The house sat on the edge of Riverstone, a modest single-story cabin with cedar siding and a small yard enclosed by a wooden fence that had seen better days. Michael had kept it in order as best he could, but some corners bore the neglect of solitude. He wheeled himself up the ramp to the front door, glancing back as Bruno padded behind him. The shepherd's steps were slow but deliberate, his tail hanging low yet relaxed. Inside, Bruno paused in the doorway, sniffing the air, his nose twitching as he explored the scents of wood smoke, old coffee, and the faint oil of leather furniture. He circled the living room cautiously, his nails tapping against the hardwood floor, before returning to Michael's side, as if claiming the space once again. Michael guided himself toward the kitchen, speaking softly as he moved. "It's not much, Bruno, but it's home." He bent to place a bowl of water on the floor. Bruno approached, sniffed, and drank deeply, his throat working in steady gulps. Watching him, Michael felt his chest swell with both pride and sorrow. The dog had endured so much, yet he was still here. As afternoon faded into evening, Michael wheeled out to the front porch, Bruno following with quiet loyalty. Across the narrow street, the laughter of children carried through the crisp air. A boy, no more than 10, rode a battered red bicycle in wobbly circles near his driveway. He had a mop of chestnut hair that stuck up in all directions, and his jeans were torn at the knees. His face bore the openness of youth, but also a shadow of loneliness. This was Evan Miller, Michael's neighbor. Evan lived with his mother, Sarah, a woman in her early 30s who worked long hours at the diner in town. Her husband, Evan's father, had died in a car accident 2 years prior, leaving Sarah with a quiet resilience and a touch of sadness she tried to hide behind polite smiles. Evan, though spirited, often wandered alone, his companionship limited to his bicycle and the stray baseball he tossed against the garage wall. Evan noticed Bruno immediately. His bike wobbled to a stop and he stared with wide hazel eyes. "Whoa," he breathed, dropping the handlebars. "That's a German shepherd." Bruno stiffened, his ears tilting back, his body lowered slightly, a cautious stance. Michael raised a hand, calm but firm. "Easy, Bruno." He looked at Evan, his voice carrying across the street. "He's new here. Give him a little space." But Evan, curious and bold in the way only children could be, took a few tentative steps forward. His sneakers crunched over the gravel as he crouched low, extending a hand. "Hey, boy," he said softly, his voice gentle. "It's okay. I won't hurt you." Bruno's gaze fixed on the boy. His muscles trembled as if torn between retreat and recognition. Then, with a slow blink, he took a step forward. His nose twitched, inhaling the scent of the boy's hand. For a long moment, he stood frozen, then he lowered his head and allowed Evan's fingers to brush against his fur. Michael held his breath, half expecting a snap or growl. Instead, Bruno exhaled, a quiet, tired sound, and his body eased. Evan's face lit with a grin. "He likes me." Michael couldn't help but smile faintly. "Seems he does." From the doorway of the Miller house, Sarah stepped out. She was a slender woman with long brown hair pulled back in a messy ponytail, her face pale from fatigue but still carrying a natural warmth. Wiping her hands on her apron, she called, "Evan!" "Don't bother Mr. Harris." Her voice held a mixture of protectiveness and apology. Michael raised a hand in reassurance. "It's all right, Sarah." "He's fine." She offered a small smile, though the lines of worry on her brow deepened. She knew loss had carved both households in different ways, and she was cautious not to impose. With a gentle call, she beckoned Evan back, though the boy looked reluctant to leave. That night, as the house settled into quiet, Bruno lay curled at the foot of Michael's bed, his head resting near the wheels of the chair parked close by. The air outside grew colder, and a breeze rattled the old oak branches against the windows. Michael lay awake longer than usual, listening to the slow, steady breathing of his partner beside him. He reached down, brushing his fingers against the shepherd's back. "Welcome home," he whispered. Bruno's tail thumped once in reply. The days that followed slipped into a rhythm neither Michael nor Bruno had felt in years. Morning light crept gently through the blinds of Michael's cabin, spilling across the worn hardwood floor where Bruno often lay. Despite his scars and limp, the shepherd carried himself with the same quiet dignity of his service days, though moments of hesitation still haunted him. Michael wheeled himself into the small backyard one crisp morning, the grass damp with dew. He held a whistle in his hand, one he hadn't used since the night of the explosion. His heart pounded as he raised it to his lips and blew a short, sharp note. Bruno's ears flicked immediately, his body stiffening as though the years had fallen away. "Sit," Michael commanded firmly. The response was instant. Bruno lowered his haunches onto the grass, his amber eyes locked on Michael's. Relief washed over the man, and he let out a quiet laugh, almost foreign to his lips. He tried again, giving the command for "stay." Bruno froze, not a muscle twitching, just as he had been trained. But then, as Michael reached for the next command, a sudden clap of wood from a neighbor's construction project split the air. The sound mimicked an explosion too closely. Bruno flinched violently, his body dropping low, tail pressed tight between his legs. His chest heaved with panicked breaths, and he barked sharply, eyes darting around as if the yard itself had turned into a battlefield. Michael's hands stilled on the rims of his chair. His voice softened, no longer an officer's command but a friend's reassurance. "Easy, Bruno. It's over. You're safe." He wheeled forward, resting a hand against the shepherd's trembling shoulder until the dog's breaths slowed and his body eased. Michael exhaled, understanding the truth. They both carried wounds that didn't show on the surface. That afternoon, the quiet knock of knuckles sounded on the front door. Linda Martinez stepped inside carrying a brown paper bag filled with treats. She wore a thick wool coat, her auburn hair pulled back neatly. Her cheeks flushed from the autumn chill. Her eyes brightened at the sight of Bruno resting near Michael's chair. "Well, look at him," she said warmly, "settled in like he never left." Michael smiled faintly. "We're getting there." He remembers everything, but the memories aren't always kind. Linda set the bag on the counter and pulled out a parcel of fresh kibble, along with a bundle of bones wrapped in butcher paper. "I thought he might like something extra." "He's earned it, hasn't he?" Michael chuckled. "He always did prefer real food to dry kibble." Linda's gaze softened as she sat down across from him. "Word spreading, you know. Folks around town are talking about the officer who found his old partner again. Some call it fate. Others say it's a miracle Michael's jaw tightened slightly. I don't care what they call it. He's here." "That's enough for me. Still," Linda could see the flicker of something unspoken in his eyes. Pride, perhaps, or maybe the relief of no longer being entirely alone. She reached out, laying a gentle hand on his arm. "Don't underestimate what this means to people. In a town like ours, we need stories of hope." Over the following week, Michael noticed subtle changes around the neighborhood. A box of biscuits appeared on his porch one morning with a note scrawled in a child's handwriting. For Bruno, the hero dog. Later, a retired veteran from the American Legion Post stopped by with a leash embroidered with the words, "Never Forgotten." Each gesture was small, but together they built a quiet testament. Bruno had become more than a dog. He was a symbol of survival, of loyalty that even fire and time couldn't erase. On a particularly cool evening, Michael sat on the porch with a blanket draped over his lap. Bruno rested beside him, his head on the man's boot. Across the street, Evan Miller kicked a worn soccer ball alone, his laughter echoing faintly. When the ball rolled toward the curb, Bruno's ears perked. He stood, his limp noticeable but his curiosity sharper, and nudged the ball back with his nose. Evan's face lit up. "Thanks, boy." He darted over and gave Bruno a quick scratch behind the ear. Bruno's tail wagged once, cautious but willing. Sarah appeared soon after, wiping her hands on a dish towel, her brow creased with both fatigue and maternal worry. Her tall, slender frame leaned slightly against the doorframe, her brown eyes scanning her son. She called out, "Don't stay out too late, Evan." "Dinner's almost ready." Michael offered a small nod in greeting, which Sarah returned with a polite but guarded smile. She had endured enough hardship not to open up quickly, yet there was kindness in her restraint. Back inside, as the night deepened, Michael watched Bruno settle onto the rug near the fireplace. He found himself talking aloud, recounting old memories of patrols, of long nights on duty. Bruno's ears twitched, his gaze never straying from Michael's voice as if anchoring both of them to the present. When the fire cracked and popped, Bruno startled again, muscles stiff, eyes darting. Michael sighed and wheeled forward, crouching as much as the chair allowed. He stroked the shepherd's head slowly. "We'll get through it, both of us." Step by step, Bruno leaned into his touch, the tension in his body loosening. For Michael, it was proof that healing didn't come in grand gestures, it came in quiet persistence, in the daily choice to face the echoes of the past together. The wind had been restless all day, rattling branches against windows and sweeping dead leaves across Riverstone's narrow streets. By nightfall, the storm arrived in full force. Rain lashed against rooftops, the gutters overflowed, and the old power lines that stretched across the town sagged beneath the gusts. The lights flickered in Michael's cabin once, twice, then went out completely, leaving only the dim orange glow of the fireplace. Michael sat in his wheelchair near the hearth, a blanket draped across his legs. Bruno lay curled at his feet, his ears twitching with every rumble of thunder. The storm carried with it an eerie weight, the kind that pressed on the chest and made silence feel heavy. Michael reached for his inhaler on the side table, but the effort of the storm had already worn him thin. His chest tightened, breath catching short, each inhale a little shallower than the last. "Damn it," he muttered under his breath, fumbling for the device. His hands shook as he raised it, but when he pressed down, the hiss sputtered weakly, nearly empty. Panic rippled through him. The injury he carried from the explosion 3 years ago had left him with scar tissue in his lungs, a reminder that his body would never fully cooperate again. Bruno lifted his head instantly, his eyes sharp, his ears pricked as he sensed the change. He let out a sharp bark, once, twice, the sound cutting through the storm's roar. Michael tried to calm him. "Easy, boy." "I'm all right." His words faltered as another wave of breathlessness struck, leaving him clutching the armrest of his chair. Bruno rose to his feet, circling once before darting to the front door. He barked furiously, pawing at the wood, his instincts kicking in. When Michael didn't move, the dog turned back, his gaze burning with urgency. Then, with one last bark, he threw his weight against the door. The latch gave, and the German shepherd disappeared into the storm. Across the street, young Evan Miller had been standing at his bedroom window, watching the storm with wide eyes. The boy loved the chaos of thunder and lightning, but tonight he was restless, unable to shake a strange unease. When he saw Bruno racing across the street, soaked fur plastered to his body, barking wildly at their front porch, he dropped his curtain and ran to the door. Sarah, his mother, intercepted him. "Evan, what on earth—" She stopped short as she saw the dog on their porch, barking, turning back toward Michael's house, then barking again. Sarah Miller was a woman shaped by hardship. Tall and slender, her frame carried both grace and weariness. Her dark brown hair, tied back in a messy ponytail, had streaks of gray beginning to show at the temples too early for her 32 years. Life as a single mother, juggling shifts at the town's diner and raising Evan alone after her husband's accident, had left shadows beneath her eyes. Still, she carried herself with quiet strength, though she was slow to trust. Now, watching Bruno's frantic movements, Sarah's instincts sharpened. Something's wrong. She pulled on her raincoat, tugged Evan's hood up over his head, and hurried outside. "Show us, boy," she called over the wind. "Take us." Bruno wasted no time. He bolted back across the street, his paws splashing through puddles, stopping only to bark at them until they followed. Sarah pushed forward, shielding Evan with her arm until they reached Michael's front porch. The door stood ajar, the wind howling through. Inside, Michael slumped in his wheelchair, his face pale, his breath shallow and ragged. He clutched the edge of the armrest, sweat beading on his brow. Sarah rushed to his side. "Michael, stay with me." She turned sharply to her son. "Evan, phone call 911. The boy scrambled to the landline, his small hands shaking as he punched the numbers. His voice cracked as he told the operator what was happening, his eyes darting back to where Michael wheezed. Bruno stood rigid beside the wheelchair, barking at intervals, as if urging them to act faster. Sarah knelt down, gripping Michael's hand. "Hold on! Help's coming." Her voice, though firm, trembled beneath the storm's weight. Michael managed a faint nod, his gray eyes focusing briefly on Bruno. Minutes stretched like hours until the red flash of ambulance lights pierced the rain outside. 2 EMTs burst through the door, both in their 40s, clad in reflective jackets soaked through from the storm. One, a heavy-set man with sandy hair named Tom, carried an oxygen tank. The other, a lean woman with cropped black hair named Alicia, wheeled in a stretcher. They worked quickly, sliding the mask over Michael's face, adjusting the flow of oxygen. His breathing eased slowly, the rasp softening into steadier pulls. "You'll be all right, sir," Tom assured him. "We've got you." Bruno stood guard the entire time, his fur dripping, his body tense, but his eyes locked on Michael as if daring the storm itself to challenge him. When the EMTs lifted Michael onto the stretcher, Bruno pressed close, brushing his muzzle against the man's hand. Michael's lips moved beneath the mask, his voice faint but clear enough. "Good boy. You saved me." Sarah wrapped an arm around Evan, who looked on with wide eyes, both frightened and awed. "See, Mom?" he whispered. "I told you he's a hero." Later that night, after the ambulance had taken Michael to the hospital and the storm finally began to fade, Sarah stood on the porch with Evan. Bruno sat beside them, exhausted but unyielding, his coat still damp. Sarah reached down, hesitating only a moment before running her fingers gently over his fur. "Thank you," she said quietly. "You're more than just a dog. You're family." Evan's grin was bright even in the dim porch light. He wrapped his arms around Bruno's neck, whispering, "You're our guardian." Bruno leaned into the boy's embrace, his tail giving one slow, steady wag. That night marked a change. No longer was Bruno simply the ghost of a past life or a K9 retired in silence. He had stepped into a new role, not only Michael's partner but protector of the small circle of lives around him. The weeks after the storm settled into a fragile calm. The town of Riverstone, with its weather-worn houses and narrow streets lined with oaks, carried on in its usual rhythm. Yet, beneath the surface, whispers traveled through diners, gas stations, and grocery aisles. Someone had been prowling the neighborhood at night, breaking into sheds and garages, sometimes slipping into houses while families slept. It was never more than tools, electronics, or cash taken, but the pattern was enough to stir unease. Michael had heard the rumors during one of Linda's visits. She brought soup and sat with him on the porch, her voice low as she mentioned the latest theft. A neighbor down the road had woken to find his back door ajar and his wallet missing. Michael listened quietly, one hand resting on Bruno's head. His instincts, dulled but not dead, tightened at the thought. Crime had a way of finding even the quietest towns. That night, the air carried a biting chill. The moon was half hidden behind clouds, and silence draped itself over the block. Michael sat in his chair near the window, a book in his lap, when Bruno stiffened suddenly. The shepherd's ears shot up, his body tense, nostrils flaring as he caught a scent. A low growl rumbled from his chest before he bolted toward the door, barking with sharp urgency. Michael felt the old surge of adrenaline. His hands moved without hesitation, wheeling himself to the phone. He trusted Bruno's instincts as he always had. Dialing with quick precision, he called the police, his voice calm but clipped. "This is Michael Harris, retired officer. My dog's alerting. Someone's out there. Send a unit outside," Bruno barked furiously, claws scratching against the porch as he lunged toward the yard's edge. The wooden gate rattled under his weight, his amber eyes locked on movement in the shadows. 2 blocks away, Officer Ryan Carter, a patrolman in his late 20s with sandy hair and a square jaw, picked up the call. Ryan was known around town as diligent but still carrying the nervous energy of youth. He had always admired Michael, whose years of service were the kind of legacy rookies studied. Without hesitation, Ryan swung his cruiser down Maple Street, headlights slicing the dark. In the yard, Bruno barked louder, his body stiff as a figure scrambled clumsily over the neighbor's fence. A man in a dark hoodie, lean and jittery, hit the ground running, but his flight was cut short by the flash of Ryan's patrol lights and the shout of command. Within minutes, the suspect was pinned against the cruiser, hands cuffed behind his back. Ryan called it in, his voice firm but tinged with satisfaction. "Suspect apprehended." Thanks to Harris's dog, Michael, watching from the porch, felt a strange mix of pride and relief. He wheeled forward slightly, calling Bruno back with a sharp whistle. The shepherd returned immediately, still tense but obedient, his eyes never leaving the suspect until the car pulled away. Michael reached down, patting his head. "Good work, partner." "Still got it." The news spread quickly. By morning, word had reached the cafe, the post office, the high school. "That old K9 saved the street," people said. Some called Bruno the Night Watch, others the hero of Maple Street. Children at the elementary school whispered about the German shepherd who had caught a thief in the dark. At home, Evan Miller was more inspired than anyone. He sat at his small desk by the window, his notebook open, pencil scratching furiously. His brown hair stuck up in messy tufts, and his hazel eyes glowed with determination. For his English assignment, he was supposed to write about a hero. While some of his classmates chose firefighters, soldiers, or athletes, Evan pressed hard into the paper with each word. "My hero is a dog." He described Bruno's courage during the storm, his bark that saved Michael, and now his alert that had caught a thief. He wrote about loyalty, about bravery, about how true heroes didn't always walk on 2 legs. When Sarah read the essay later that night, her tired face softened into a smile. She placed a hand gently on Evan's shoulder. "Your father would be proud of you," she said, her voice quiet but filled with warmth. At school, Evan's teacher, Mrs. Parker, a petite woman in her 40s with sharp glasses and a kind smile, was so moved by the essay that she read it aloud to the class. Soon, the story spread to parents, then to the local newspaper. Within a week, the headline read, "Boy calls, K9 his hero community agrees." Michael, though not one for attention, found himself approached by neighbors he hadn't spoken to in years. Some came to drop off treats for Bruno. Others stopped simply to shake his hand. He accepted their words with quiet humility, but deep down he felt the same as Evan. Bruno wasn't just a dog. He was a hero. That evening, as the sun sank behind the trees, Michael sat with Evan on the porch. The boy leaned against the railing, his notebook still in hand. Bruno lay stretched out at Michael's side, his muzzle gray but his eyes alert. "I want to be like you someday," Evan said suddenly, looking up at Michael. "A policeman. Someone people can count on, just like you." And Bruno, Michael looked at him, a lump rising in his throat. He reached out, placing a hand on the boy's shoulder. "You've already got the heart for it, Evan. That's the hardest part. The rest, you'll learn." Evan beamed, turning to scratch Bruno's ear. "Then you'll be my first partner, right, boy?" Bruno thumped his tail once, a quiet promise in the fading light. That night, as the crickets sang and the street lay peaceful, Michael wheeled inside with Bruno at his side. For the first time in years, he felt the neighborhood wasn't just a place he lived, it was a community he belonged to again. And all of it had begun with the dog who had come back from the dark. It was a bright spring morning in Riverstone, the kind that carried the smell of wet earth and blossoms. The storm season had passed, leaving behind a clearer sky and grass greening along the neighborhood paths. Michael had begun taking longer walks in his wheelchair with Bruno at his side. The shepherd, though slower and more deliberate in his steps, still held the posture of a watchful guardian, ears flicking to every rustle and sound. Michael wheeled himself down a path that curved through the woods just outside town. The trail had always been one of his favorites before the injury, a mix of packed dirt and grass, shaded by oaks and maples, with the occasional view opening up to a field beyond. It was also the same trail he had avoided since the accident that ended his career. Now, with Bruno walking beside him, he felt brave enough to return. Bruno trotted steadily, his coat gleaming faintly in the sun, though gray showed around his muzzle. His limp was subtle now, a reminder of battles fought but survived. Every so often he glanced at Michael as if checking that his partner was still with him. They reached a small slope in the trail, a place where rainwater had carved a rut down the dirt. Michael hesitated, eyeing the incline. He tightened his grip on the wheels, trying to steady his chair as it rolled forward. But the soil beneath was softer than expected, slick from a shower the night before. One wheel slid into the rut, jerking the chair sideways. "Damn," Michael muttered, pulling at the rims, but the more he tried to correct, the worse it became. The chair tilted, the downhill side dropping dangerously close to the edge where the trail sloped into a shallow ditch overgrown with grass and stones. Before he could call for help, Bruno sprang into action. The shepherd lunged to Michael's side, teeth gripping the fabric of his jacket sleeve. With a powerful pull, muscles straining, he anchored himself against the ground. His claws tore furrows into the earth, his body braced like a soldier refusing to retreat. "Easy, boy, easy," Michael urged, gripping the arms of the chair as it shuddered. Bruno growled deep in his throat, pulling harder until the wheel found steadier ground. Inch by inch, the chair shifted back onto the path. Michael gasped as balance returned, the threat of tumbling into the ditch finally gone. When it was over, Bruno released the sleeve, panting, his amber eyes fixed on Michael as if demanding reassurance. Michael reached forward, his hand trembling, and ruffled the fur on his partner's head. "You saved me again." Just like old times, Bruno's tail wagged once, slow but steady. Word of the near accident traveled quickly once Linda heard the story. She had become something of a confidant for Michael since Bruno's return, always checking in, always bringing with her the calm warmth of someone who had dedicated her life to second chances. When she arrived at Michael's house later that week, her arms were full of envelopes and small packages. "You've got a lot of admirers," she said with a laugh, laying the items on the kitchen table. "Seems everyone in town wants to thank Bruno for being who he is." Michael shook his head, though a smile tugged at his lips. "He doesn't need medals or gifts. He just needs to be here." Linda's eyes softened, but she didn't argue. Instead, she invited Michael, Bruno, and the Millers to the shelter that Saturday. "There's something I'd like to do. Nothing fancy, just a way for everyone to celebrate what Bruno means to this community." The shelter yard was filled with neighbors when they arrived. Folding chairs were set up in neat rows, and a banner hung across the fence reading, "Companion of Honor." Children clustered near the front, whispering excitedly, while older residents nodded with the quiet reverence of people who understood loyalty when they saw it. Bruno sat proudly beside Michael's wheelchair, his ears perked though his body remained calm. Evan bounced on his toes nearby, his face glowing with excitement. Sarah stood behind him, her hands resting gently on her son's shoulders. Her usual caution was softened today by pride for her son, for the dog who had changed their street, and perhaps for the man in the wheelchair who had shown resilience she deeply admired. Linda stepped forward, her auburn hair tied neatly, her voice carrying over the gathering. "We are here to honor not just a dog, but a symbol. Bruno has proven that courage doesn't fade with time, and loyalty doesn't die in the dark. He has saved lives, reminded us of what faith looks like, and shown us the meaning of second chances." She turned to Evan, holding out a small box. And who better to present this than the boy who wrote what touched all our hearts? Evan's hands shook as he opened the box. Inside lay a medal attached to a sturdy leather strap engraved with the words, "Companion of Honor." His hazel eyes sparkled as he knelt before Bruno, fastening the strap gently around the shepherd's neck. "For you, buddy," he whispered. The crowd erupted in applause, some clapping loudly, others wiping at their eyes. Bruno stood tall, his tail wagging, his gaze sweeping the crowd as though acknowledging them all. Michael's throat tightened as pride swelled in his chest. He reached down, brushing Bruno's ear. "Looks like you've outranked me now," he said softly, his voice filled with quiet humor. The ceremony was simple but profound. Neighbors lined up to pat Bruno's head, children presented him with drawings of capes and badges, and veterans saluted with solemn respect. For Michael, it was a moment of healing he had not expected. He had once felt discarded, forgotten after his injury. But here he was, celebrated not just for who he had been, but for the bond he still shared with his dog. As the sun dipped low, casting a golden glow over the shelter yard, Michael wheeled himself closer to Sarah and Evan. "Thank you for being part of this," he said. Sarah's smile was small but genuine. "You've given this town hope." "And my son..." Well, he looks at Bruno and sees the kind of hero every child should believe in. Evan grinned, throwing his arms around Bruno's neck once more. "You're the best partner ever," he declared. Bruno leaned into the embrace, his medal glinting in the fading light. That night, back at home, Michael sat by the window with Bruno stretched across the rug. The medal lay heavy but proud on the shepherd's chest, a symbol not of retirement, but of a legacy still alive. Michael whispered into the quiet room, "You're not just my past, Bruno. You're my present. And maybe the reason I've still got a future." Bruno's eyes closed slowly, his body easing into rest, but his tail tapped once against the floor in answer. Spring gave way to early summer, and Riverstone seemed to hum with quiet renewal. The air carried the scent of lilacs, and children's laughter drifted through the neighborhood again. Michael sat on his porch with Bruno stretched out beside him, the medal of Companion of Honor gleaming faintly in the sunlight. Life had begun to feel steady, but Michael, ever a man of purpose, felt a tug that told him there was more to be done. He wheeled himself to the shelter one morning, Bruno walking proudly at his side. Linda greeted them warmly, her auburn hair pinned up in a practical bun as always. She wore a denim jacket that had seen years of wear, but her posture was straight, her steps brisk. She had spent her life giving second chances to unwanted animals, but today Michael came with an idea that lit her curiosity. "I want to start something here," Michael told her, his voice steady but carrying the weight of conviction. "A program, not just adoption, training, healing. Dogs like Bruno ones who've been broken, written off. I want them to have what we found again." Linda tilted her head, studying him with those kind hazel eyes that missed nothing. "You mean, make Bruno the teacher?" Michael's lips curved into a rare smile. "Exactly. He's proof that scars don't have to end a story. He can show them the way back to trust." By the following week, the shelter yard was transformed. Neighbors volunteered time and supplies. Officer Ryan Carter, eager to support the idea, brought in crates and leashes from the precinct. Even Sarah came after long diner shifts, tying her brown hair back and rolling up her sleeves to help. She was slender but strong, with the quiet determination of someone who had learned how to keep going through grief. Evan followed at her heels, full of boundless energy and curiosity. The first group of dogs was a mixture of breeds and temperaments. There was Daisy, a timid golden mix with eyes that darted nervously at every sound. Max, a bulky pit bull with cropped ears, misunderstood but gentle when handled correctly. And Scout, a wiry terrier whose bark was bigger than his body. Each one bore their own history of neglect or abandonment, carrying fears that made trust difficult. Bruno entered the yard with calm authority. Though his steps were slower now, his gaze was steady, and the other dogs responded almost instinctively. Daisy, who normally shied away from people, inched closer when Bruno settled onto the grass near her. Max, often restless, lay down across from Bruno as though challenged to match his composure. Scout barked furiously at first, circling, but eventually grew quiet, watching intently. Michael demonstrated from his wheelchair, giving Bruno simple commands: sit, stay, heel. Each one Bruno performed flawlessly, his tail swishing once each time. The other dogs observed, some mimicking, others hesitant. Slowly, with repetition and patience, progress began. Linda watched from the fence, her expression touched. "He really is teaching them," she whispered. Evan beamed with pride, scribbling notes in his notebook. He had taken to treating every session like an academy class. He sketched drawings of Bruno demonstrating commands, jotting down phrases like, "Heroes never quit." He began dreaming aloud to Michael of joining the police force one day. Sarah, standing nearby, folded her arms with a soft smile. "You've given him something to look forward to," she told Michael quietly. After his father passed, he shut down. Now, every morning, he's up early, ready to be here. You've given him hope. Michael's chest tightened at her words. He glanced at Bruno, who was gently nudging Daisy forward toward Evan. "Wasn't me," he said softly. "It was him." Bruno gave us all another chance. Weeks passed and the program grew. More dogs arrived, each carrying scars of their own. Some were rehomed after finding their confidence again. Others remained longer, soaking in the calm presence Bruno radiated. The shelter, once a place of sorrow, had become a place of second beginnings. One Saturday afternoon, the yard was full of neighbors. Children ran between kennels with squeals of laughter. Parents chatted and volunteers handed out lemonade. Bruno sat in the center, a quiet pillar of it all, his amber eyes following the movement of the dogs and people around him. Michael sat near him, his wheelchair parked beneath the shade of a maple tree. He watched as Evan threw a ball across the yard, and Bruno, though slower than his younger days, jogged after it and returned it with careful precision. Evan's laughter rang out, high and full, a sound that melted years of heaviness from Michael's heart. Sarah leaned against the fence, her face softened by the light of the setting sun. She caught Michael's eye and offered a smile, unspoken but filled with respect, gratitude, and perhaps something more. For once, Michael didn't look away. As the day wound down, Bruno lay down beside Michael's chair, panting lightly, his metal glinting in the fading light. The shepherd's eyes closed, his body finally at ease, as if he knew his mission had been fulfilled. Michael rested his hand on Bruno's head, his voice low, almost a prayer. "Thank you for finding your way back to me." He tilted his face upward toward the endless blue sky, the warmth of the sun still lingering. "And thank you," he whispered, "for giving us another chance." Evan's laughter carried across the yard as he called Bruno's name, his small figure chasing after the shepherd with unbridled joy. Michael felt a calm he hadn't known in years settle over him. He was no longer just a broken officer living in the shadow of the past. He had a family, a community, and a friend who had walked through darkness to bring him back into the light. Bruno lay peacefully beside the wheelchair, eyes half shut, tail brushing against the grass. He was no longer the lost dog hiding in the shadows of a shelter. He was home. He was a hero. In the end, Michael and Bruno's story reminds us that even when we feel broken, God has a way of bringing light back into our lives. Their reunion was more than chance. It was a miracle, a sign that love and loyalty are never truly lost. Just as Bruno found his way home after years of darkness, we too can trust that God will guide us through our hardest days, giving us second chances and healing for our wounded hearts. In our everyday lives, we may carry scars, some visible, some hidden. But miracles can appear when we least expect them, often in the form of love, friendship, or faith. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs hope today. Leave a comment below and tell us what miracles you believe in. Do not forget to subscribe to the channel so you never miss stories of faith, healing, and the incredible bond between humans and animals. May God bless you and your families with strength, peace, and love. If you believe in miracles and the power of loyalty, write Amen in the comments.